Educational Policy and Literacy by Tanya Barge. Okay, educational policy is probably a term you have probably heard before. Educational policy isn't a one-size-fits-all. There are all the subgroups that need attention, such as children with disabilities. I was able to personally witness the educational policies we have for students with disabilities while completing hours for school at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. Children's Healthcare of Atlanta has a lot of patients who need long-term care in their facilities. If a child has a long-term illness such as sickle cell anemia or cancer, the school they attend is legally required to make certain accommodations. These accommodations are governed by the state of Georgia. Every state has different policies, and these policies are also in place at a federal level. The students who may need help when they're in the hospital for long term, the teacher is usually the one who makes the accommodations, and usually it's hit or miss, and it depends what county they're in, whether a parent seems to have a good relationship with their teacher or not. A great example of federal policies, one of the examples is the public schools must accept students who have disabilities. Private schools do not have to accept students with disabilities or make those accommodations because private schools do not receive funding from the government. They receive tuition from students who want to attend. Okay, educational policy and literacy. When people consider what literacy means, they probably think about having the ability to read or write. While the ability to read or write is vital, literacy and education mean more than reading or writing. For example, here's a quote. It says, "They have weakened the assumption that teachers and students are primarily engaged in building common cultures and identities as they develop shared knowledge. Instead, schools are now required to trade in skills and qualifications that will act as passports for their pupils to a future somewhere else." So the reality is lawmakers are creating literacy and educational policies we implement today. Common Core is a great example of measurement, particularly for math, that as you imagine that not everyone agrees on it. So the downside of literacy policy is the conflict between teachers, parents, and the politicians. Some people feel like politicians they're not in the education department, so why are they making decisions about this? Okay, federal policies versus state policies. Okay, federal policies can influence every state. Federal policies can impact more than education. For example, federal policy was the reason schools became desegregated following the landmark case of Brown versus Board of Education. State policies can influence every school in their particular state. For example, Georgia will have different school policies compared to California. People who support state policies believe the federal government should not make decisions for individual states. People feel like the federal government doesn't understand, maybe they feel like they don't understand what their state needs because they're not in the state. People who are against state policies feel like when states make decisions, a lot of times they're making decisions that perhaps hurt a minority. Okay, what happens when the states and the federal governments disagree? And that happens a lot. Okay, federal government always trumps states government as far as legal powers. That doesn't mean the states always follow the federal government instructions. For example, I believe, so Colorado made it legal to smoke marijuana in certain areas, but the federal government has a policy that is still illegal. So it really just depends. If the federal government wanted to, it could stop them. So, for example, the Supreme Court, the federal government ruled in the Brown versus Board of Education court case that segregation was unconstitutional. Despite the Supreme Court ruling, many states did not comply with the order of desegregation. Segregation is declared unconstitutional. As you can see, here's a newspaper article. And here are more pictures. The federal government threatens to take away federal government to states who refuse to integrate their schools. Obviously, money talks, so the schools did eventually cave and implement desegregation. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the sociocultural theory and what that means. Just quickly wanted to go over Piaget and Vygotsky. They are very well known for their contributions to learning and the sociocultural theory. Vygotsky was born in 1896 in Russia. Piaget was another influential scientist, and Piaget was from Switzerland. Piaget is on the left and Vygotsky is on the right. And that's a statue of Piaget. Okay, sociocultural theory. The sociocultural theory emphasizes the roles of social, culture, and historical factors in the human experience. The sociocultural theory can be understood by breaking it down into parts. First, we have the social aspect of the sociocultural theory. Children have social factors that affect their learning. Every child interacts differently with their peers. Children can learn different skills by working with their fellow students. I would apply this skill by having students work in groups. Sometimes as an educator, it can be difficult to teach certain skills to children. And yet, if you put them in groups, they can pick up on the skill much faster. Maybe they're just more comfortable with someone their age, or a child can just make more sense in a way that an adult can't. Second, you have the cultural factor that affects how a student learns. Students in a classroom come from varying backgrounds and bring their backgrounds into the classroom. I'm reminded of an international case. It involved male students who were unaccustomed to being around females, except for their mother. And so the teacher was having issues with teaching them because they weren't accustomed to it. And so just something as simple as that can turn into a learning problem if the teacher is not aware of what's going on. And then a study, just something as simple like a study done by Forsman showed the positive effects of paired reading. That was supposed to go up top. And that was for the students who are in groups. Okay, linking educational policy and literacy. Sociocultural theory, educational policy, literacy, federal and state government are all linked together. Students who come from a disadvantaged background are going to most likely struggle more. They're going to have a different set of social skills because of their environment. These students have a different home environment and may struggle socially. The educational policies in place may or may not help these students. These students are going to have different literacy rates and may struggle in areas such as reading. Reading is a skill that is crucial for students to learn in order to progress. For example, I'm sure people are aware we have a lot of, I believe it's ESL, the ESL students. I believe that's the name of the program. But if English is your second language, then those students are going to struggle. So we have to address that, and we have to put programs in place to help them. Or if we wait until they're in middle school or high school, they're going to have a much harder time trying to catch up. Even small changes in state policies would change the reading literacy. We saw this in the study of the foster care children by Foreman, even just how small changes can have drastic changes and outcomes for children. The educational and literacy policies we put in place are going to influence the quality of education students receive. From the governmental policies of desegregation to No Child Left Behind, these policies can influence education and a child's social interactions. I think the federal government and states are going to have to address the current educational trends and literacy rates. The United States is not where it should be as a whole, and some states are worse than others. Educational policy influences a child's literacy, environment, and future. Okay, linking educational policy and literacy. Sociocultural theory, educational policy, literacy, federal and state government are all linked together. Students who come from a disadvantaged background are going to most likely struggle more. They're going to have a different